Good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Zittrain. I teach at Harvard Law School. Thank you to my one paid fan in the audience for that. Look at that. It's the power of collaborative creativity, which is not this session. It's coming up this afternoon. Instead, right now, we're talking about new frontiers of various sorts. And to join us in talking through that, we have a very distinguished panel. May I ask them to come on up and make themselves at home. Welcome. So let's begin with Christina Domecq, as she says, the Sherry. Is that right? I never tried Domecq Sherry before. You are the founder and CEO of Spinvox. Tell us how you got to the point of deciding that your life's work for the moment should be translating what comes from voice into text.
About 4 years ago, inundated with voicemail. Thought this is the most ridiculous technology on the planet. There's got to be a better way. And began by converting your voicemail messages into text, and today I've converted billions and billions of your voices into real-time text and getting better and better at it every day.
Got it. So most people, it's like Mark Twain says about the weather. Everybody always talks about it, but nobody ever does anything. You're ready to finally do something about the scourge of voicemail to turn it into, I guess, email or any other form of text. And is it just voicemail you're doing right now, or is it basically any form of audio voice you want to put into a text form?
It's actually any audio file at all. So it is, like I said, billions and billions of voices in different languages into content. So for the very first time, voice is becoming content. We can call it the forgotten audio file or the forgotten voices, but there are many forgotten voices out there, particularly in this day and age of amazing video and amazing media. But we often forget that a Charlie Chaplin movie, albeit entertaining, isn't as cool as something with audio.
But extremely easy to convert into text from audio.
Yes, it is.
Yes. So what basket of skills and experiences do you think put you in a position to be able to do something about this problem?
Fortitude, determination, commitment.
But what got you started? When you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
To be honest, I wanted to be a firewoman.
Firefighter?
Firefighter, yes. Is that the politically correct term now? I was raised in Spain and then ended up in the United States, and was interestingly educated, having had a European background and then a American education. And I was taught that if you set your mind to it, you could achieve anything. And I've started 3 businesses, and Spinvox is by far the largest and the most global opportunity I've ever encountered. So at the ripe age now of 32, I'm excitingly continue to take on this marketplace.
And tell us a little bit about the other 2 businesses.
IT infrastructure and IT training businesses, quite small businesses in relationship to where we are now. So,
and I don't know if there's a delicate way needed to ask it. How did you exit from those 2 businesses?
I sold them.
That's the right answer. 200 points in a retirement. That's wonderful. And how would you define success for your current venture? Selling it?
No. Spinvox being on every single one of your handsets.
Ah, like Bill Gates is a computer on every desktop, Spinvox in every handset or modality. Do you think by the time you achieve that vision, will people know it as Spinvox, or will it be kind of under the bonnet, as they say here?
No, I hope to have nothing under the bonnet. It's absolutely is fully branded Spinvox, and the customers in this room who use it know that it is definitely a Spinvox experience.
And do you then define your marketplace as the world at large?
We do, with 6 languages today, and we've got Arabic and Mandarin coming out in the next few months. So many more languages to come, many more markets to crack. Over 100 million users this year.
Got it.
Growing.
And apart from the fortitude, how much would you say the secret sauce that makes your company work has to do with really brilliant, cutting-edge theory and engineering, inventing new things in the realm of converting text-to-speech as an engineering problem, versus just step-by-step, great execution, getting it there?
Well, speech technology has been around forever. Why am I going to do it any better than IBM with 5 billion behind them? I think the reality is we talk about product layer. We talk about changing the way you, as a consumer, as an end customer, engage with speech technology. And we actually give you a product that's useful, whether you're speaking an email or speaking a text or getting your voicemail converted into text. For the very first time, I will reliably convert any audio file into text over and over and over and over again.
Got it. Thanks very much. On to Christian. Christian Segerstrail. Did I pronounce that properly? I didn't,
Sort
did I?
of.
What cognac is your last name like?
No, it's actually a Swedish last name. It's Segerstråle, if you want to pronounce it in the Finnish twang of Swedish that I speak.
Segerstrail.
Yeah, it's really more or less.
Very good. And you have founded and run Playfish. Is that
That's right. Yeah, that's correct.
And is Playfish your first venture, or are you two a serial entrepreneur?
It's my second venture, so if you're allowed to call your second venture, you know, if you're a serial entrepreneur by then yeah, I'd be a serial entrepreneur.
Yes, yeah, computer science is counting from zero.
That's great, yeah.
And tell us about Playfish. Is it a game? Is it a social network? Is it some interesting combination of the two?
So Playfish is a social games company. So our mission is to change how the world plays games. So far, the computer games industry over the past 30 years or so has been very focused on a solitary experience of players. It didn't really start that way, as the veterans would know. It's a lot of the arcade experience was actually quite social. It was about people playing together. But certainly, recently, in the past 15 to 20 years, it's really been about people almost slightly sad, sitting by themselves in front of a big screen and fighting the monsters. It's sort of almost a caveman-like entertainment experience of
instead of sitting by themselves in front of the big screen, meeting people through it.
Yeah, well, quite. So really, if you look at where the broader computer games industry has been heading, nearly all of the growth last year in the computer games industry, which, by the way, is a $50 billion industry. It's bigger than movies. It's bigger than music in most countries these days. So where the broader industry has been heading, nearly all of the growth last year came from the Nintendo Wii, which is basically where the marketing message is about people playing games together with their family and friends at home. So we think there is a tremendous opportunity to take this industry, which has become quite mature off the back of a solitary experience, if you like, that refers to or that engages people through kind of solitary, standalone fight or flight emotions, and take that industry forward to a place where we can broaden the appeal of games by getting people to play together and use games not as a way of passing time, but rather to communicate, express, have fun together, reaffirm friendships. So what we do is we create games using social networks as our platform. So social networks map out your friend relationships, your family, your friends, your acquaintances online, and we use those relationships to create gameplay experiences where the emotional reason why you play is nothing really to do with what's going on the screen. It's using that experience to socialize, to interact, to have fun with your friends. Much more, in some ways, like playing ball in the park or just hanging out with your friends than it is like a computer gaming experience on a 42-inch plasma in your cellar by yourself.
So is it possible then that my first exposure to Playfish, if I haven't heard of it, might be through somebody I know on Orkut or Facebook or wherever who invites me to join them for a game?
Yeah, that's right. What's really, I mean, to give you a sense, we've been running for about 18 months. We launched our first game in December 2007. And we've reached well over 30 million monthly active players. We reach over 5 million people in any given day. That's the population of a small country. So we've grown really quickly. And the way that games get distributed in our environment has nothing to do with traditional games retail. Our consumers don't think that they are gamers. They hang out on a social network. They see what their friend has been doing. They browse their profile. Or they get a direct invitation to actually be part of a game. And they get engaged with the game through that activity. So the main, again, emotional driver why you get involved in the game is your friend.
Yes.
It's not really the game itself.
Yes. Now, I suppose if it's just you and the dragon in the old mode you were talking about, it had better be a very well-rendered dragon with great sound effects in order to keep you occupied. Is the idea then that you can make your games more accessible, maybe not as sophisticated on the technological side of things? I'm reminded of a top executive at McDonald's once told me that when they hire people at McDonald's, if they quit after 15 minutes, McDonald's still comes out ahead. There's so little training to get you going on the fry-later that, you know, it's fine. You're in, you're out, McDonald's wins. Is it that kind of thing here where you can, without hot grease, you can play a Playfish game and not need to, is like data learn lifetime to master, or?
Yeah, but let me maybe answer that in a different kind of way. What's important in our games, of course, because we do target people who aren't necessarily gamers. In many ways, I mean, our business model is microtransactions. So people who get into the game, they can play for free, and then over time, we try to offer them things which they feel meaningful, are worth paying some small amount of money for, like virtual goods. So what we try to do is we try to get everybody engaged in our games. So yes, we work very, very hard on making them very easy to get into as games. But what's really, I think the games are actually in many ways much deeper than games which even have a big dragons and lots of pre-rendered levels, because I worked in the games industry now for nearly 10 years, and my previous business was a game business for mobile phones. And even if those were smaller games, they were still all about us taking it's the same basic production process for a game. You try to take the player through a journey, through puzzles, through story, through ways of designing that experience in such a way that the gamer gets hooked into the game. You try to draw them into that experience and tell your story as a game creator. We don't actually do that. We create environments that are easy to get into, but which ultimately are used by our players to tell their stories. So this is not about us trying to, say, render the dragons in as beautiful way as possible and then tell the story that, or basically lay out the path that we want players to walk through. But rather we lay out the toys, if you like, the tools for players to tell their own stories. And the interaction between a player and a community is enormously complex because it's not to do with the different tactics of slaying the dragon. It's got to do with how should I interface with my friends today? Who do I give gifts to? Or who do I write a message to? And it's an infinitely more complex set of emotions that drives that behavior. And in that sense, it's much more like playing cards or playing a board game at home.
Got it. And if I happen to be friendless, hypothetically speaking, or have boring friends, I can come on to Playfish and make friends who will play with me, or I basically should bring my current social network with me if I
we focus very much on games designed for you to play with your real-world friends. There are also games which make sense to play with strangers, but there's quite a lot of those on the internet already. So, for example, if you get into something like World of Warcraft, that's an enormously successful game which draws you into it maybe through the game itself, but keeps you there through the community that you're part of. Now, say our biggest game, a game called Pet Society, which incidentally has as many monthly actives as World of Warcraft today, that is actually drawn, it's about 11, 12 million monthly active players. And that is really solely designed for you to interact in a virtual pet environment with your real friends. So all of your friends live in the same village as you do. And the emotional the value that game delivers is through those real world friend relationships. What you do in the game means something in the real world.
Got it.
And that's what drives the engagement for us.
And your current business model is?
So it's microtransactions and advertising, but predominantly microtransactions. So we sell small digital goods which can be used for either expression or actual some use inside the game, which is sort of functional.
You could dress your character. Or
something like that. Or you can buy a gift to give to a friend, or you can perhaps buy something which gives you some extended functionality in the game or makes your character faster. But to give you a sense, for example, in December last year, we would have sold over 20 million bits of Christmas decoration, virtual Christmas decoration inside the game.
And does that expire after Christmas, so they buy it again the next year, or they can put it in the attic?
No, there's new... well, there's, we would probably launch new items next year. So, but
you don't want to be caught wearing last year's Christmas hat.
Absolutely not. You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't
Good thinking. Yes.
But there are items that do expire, and it's kind of weird to artificially create expiry into items for people to feel that they are more valuable. Because
rivalrousness to things that are really just
it is quite interesting
computer bits. And are they alienable? Can I, if I buy it from you, can I sell it or give it to a friend?
Yes, you can.
So I can find this stuff on eBay if I wanted.
So we try to shut that stuff down quite quickly, but you could find it on eBay.
You want to be the sole supplier of stuff?
No. We actually do encourage obviously, it's a social game, so it's all about people interacting and trading and having fun together. What we want to avoid is scammers, if you like, or people, if they don't use our system to trade, or if they don't trade inside the game, then there might be trust issues.
They promise something, then they don't deliver it, all that sort of thing. Right. And Christina, we should have asked you on the way through, business model for Spinvox. How do you make money?
I started in the B2C world, and within about 9 months in the UK with 200,000 customers, and as I said, I nearly have 100 million now active customers on it. Ended up going through the carriers, so I get paid for every single voice message I convert into text.
So it might be that I'm using Spinvox but don't quite know it because the carrier, or it's offered by Spinvox.
Always says it's my Spinvox.
Part of the deal.
Always.
Got it, like Intel Inside sort of thing.
Got
it. Okay. Daniel Ek Did I pronounce that okay?
Yep, that's great.
Great. Founder, CEO of Spotify. Tell us about Spotify, how it got started and how you came to be the one to found it.
So essentially, the idea came somewhere 2002, 2003, because I kind of realized that it was at the time where we had Napster and Kazaa came over as well. So I kind of realized that this was a sort of thing that was happening because people were caring about access to content. They wanted more content. They wanted to explore it from a bigger diversity of artists, because right now the situation that we have is actually a pretty good thing for the music industry. You have something where people are actually discovering new artists. You have something where people are sharing content between themselves. So through friends, they're discovering new content. However, the actual business model didn't work, of course, because these file sharing networks were illegal and they were shut down. But what I thought was the only thing that you can actually do to compete with file sharing is actually creating a better product. And that's what the music industry and the movie industry actually needs to do. I thought about it for a while and actually tried it in 2002, but quickly realized that that wasn't the time to do it. So I went on to do some other businesses. And in 2006, I kind of said, now it's the time. And it took us almost 2 years to get the licensing done, but at the end of 2008.
And how do you, that 2-year period, I'll bet you could make a televised drama out of it. How do you first start knocking on the doors of the Vivendis of the world, of the barons that have this content and appear to be, talk about 2006, terrified about what's going on, and you show up and say, I've got the solution to your ills?
Not really like that, but something close to it. But literally, I was traveling around the world for 2 years. I was meeting everyone from the actual janitor to the CEO of the company. So
how did you meet the janitor?
At the front entrance, you know. Said hi to him, demoed the product. He liked it.
He said he would see what he could do.
Yeah, let me in the door, you know.
Yeah.
That was essentially it. But it took a lot of time. And also from our end, we had to learn kind of what the industry needed and what their concerns were with both ad-supported music, but music in general.
And was there a cadre of people on the road with you that were sort of in the same kind of business, wanting to persuade the industry that there were licensed up answers to this crisis, and you'd sort of meet them in the waiting room and...
Sure. I mean, again, the music industry today is probably a $20 billion industry, so I don't think we're the only ones that try to actually do things to make sure that the industry continues to survive and thrive. So, I mean, there's lots of other services as well that has the same kind of ideas. But, there were lots of other companies that had a search engine idea as well. And it's all about execution.
Yes. And that includes for you a technology play, because am I right that Spotify is largely a peer-to-peer enterprise?
Yeah. It's a client that you download to your PC, Mac, uses peer-to-peer to stream content to your desktop pretty much instantly.
And are you finding that some ISPs in blocking peer-to-peer are also blocking Spotify?
No, actually, it's the opposite, because one of the things that we do is because we don't have to transfer the actual content from other networks, it doesn't incur costs from the ISP, because we can actually pick it from their own network.
If they can do it on the subnet, they're not having to worry about transit or peering with other big networks.
Exactly. So they're actually very positive towards this.
Got it.
Also, BitTorrent today is probably like 70% of their traffic. So, of course, if they can reduce that and reduce the legal risk, that's positive.
And how much of your day-to-day is spent still interfacing with those from whom you're licensing the content versus you finally signed the deal, that was a long 2 years, but now it's go forth and be entrepreneurial?
So I probably spend 25% of my time dealing with artists, labels, and managers. But again, I mean, just the music industry alone probably employs more than 10,000 people. So if you can actually push this through to the industry, you can get a massive workforce working for you as well, which is the positive thing.
Yes. And have you done experiments in open source? I'm aware there's something called DeSpotify or Despotify. I'm not sure which it is.
It's DeSpotify. It's not actually us that did it, but one of the things that we want to promote is, opening up our platform, because we believe that the future of the music is about sharing. Music is probably one of the most powerful social objects there is by itself. So we want people to interact with it. We want people to be able to play it on any device. We want people to be able to share it on social networks, pretty much where they are and the way they want to consume the content and provide the business model for it.
And does that mean then that those open source or free software alternatives might bypass some aspects of your business model, an ad-free version, for example, or have you managed to work it so that that's not in conflict?
We managed to work it so that that's not in conflict, because one of the things we do, for instance, with these Spotifys, we allow them to do it for subscribers only. So Spotify's business model is an ad-funded model and a subscription model. And because it's for the subscription model only, they can port it to a range of different devices, and it still supports the case.
Got it. But for ad, they're going to have to go through your client,
Yes.
which in turn can
Correct.
serve up the ads. And I guess, Christina, we should ask you, do you have an open source or open platform dimension to Spinbox?
I think for the very first time in history, a speech company actually wants to talk about their technology. We do have an open source and an open API, and released that API about 8 weeks ago, and ended up with tens of hundreds of thousands of new applications being developed. For instance, Pizza Hut ordering. Some guy developed an application so his local Pizza Hut, he could basically leave a message and tell him he wanted pepperoni with extra cheese.
And this is not a guy at Pizza Hut. This is a pizza consumer.
Yes, this is a game player at home. Plays a lot of games and eats a lot of pizza.
He wants to just be able to say pizza stat.
Yes.
And then it goes over to Pizza Hut with an emergency delivery.
Yeah. Yeah, and another one was long-form spoken emails. So being able to speak your email from your mobile phone as you're
Like dictation, you just talk.
Running down the hallway.
Got it.
That was pretty cool.
Did you say 30,000 in 8 weeks?
No, several thousand.
Several thousand
yeah.
in 8 weeks.
Yeah, more to come.
Incredible. Anything that made you nervous?
I think it's really it's a testament to what APIs and open source technology can do for the industry and how we can evolve into new verticals. And I think we talked about earlier, we talked a little bit about acquisition versus kind of evolution from development communities. And I think today we're seeing with the iPhone, huge opportunities. Developers are out there and people are eager to share their ideas. Yeah. And if I can create new business verticals and bring great ideas to the marketplace, all the better for everyone.
And so far, just for each of the 3 ideas we've heard about, roughly how much upfront did it take to really get started, money-wise? Daniel, what did it take to get going?
I can't actually comment on the individual deals, but what I can say is we've invested about 8 million euros of our own money into it, so it definitely took a lot of money to get it started.
With some other amount of dark matter to be discovered at a later date that may have complemented the 8 million.
Not really. I mean, again, we invested a lot of it initially because we believed in the idea, and the record industry really liked that aspect as well.
Got it. And Christina?
We've raised 100 million pounds from European hedge funds.
Got it.
Have you used it all up?
No, we got a little bit left over.
Because he's got some Christmas decorations on sale.
Last year.
So we've raised $21 million today, but we actually haven't used pretty much any of it. One of the great things actually to create a consumer internet business today is that a lot of it's actually very capital efficient. In the previous, you'd have to buy a lot of servers. Like we are fully cloud-based, so we actually don't own a single piece of
And by
hardware.
cloud-based, it means it's not even your hardware, it's some third party's hardware,
it's
cash and carry commodity.
Yes, correct. And it's not even hardware, it's virtualized hardware, which runs sort of in the cloud. So.
Which means it could ramp up. If Slashdot hits Playfish, you don't get Slashfish.
Yes, sort of, yeah.
You get Playdot. I got it.
Great. Yeah, so you can scale up quite easily. And also what's interesting, if you compare it to the rest of the games industry, which currently is very much focused on the sort of $10 to $50 million production value type games, which take 3 years to create, the kind of things that we create where the value comes from the community as opposed to the depth of the production value in the game, you end up investing maybe, I don't know, $500,000 to $1 million up front for a title. And the rest, because it's sort of a service and not a product, you just invest as you go. So you add features, you add things that your community likes, you listen to your community, things they hate, you take away, and things they'd like, you add, and you can sort of develop the product together with
Much
your
more
community.
iterative.
Absolutely, much more iterative, yeah.
Now, speaking of games that take 3 years in the making, we should turn to Richard Garriott, who your career seems incredibly kaleidoscopic. Just walk us through some of your biography.
Yeah, it's actually really funny to hear these people talk about their tenure because I definitely feel like the ancient one in the chair here. About 30, 35 years ago, I actually started writing computer games back in the teletype era. Published my first games right at the end of the 1970s, cusp of the 80s.
And by the teletype era, it's like there is a box here. Open box. You have an open box.
Yeah, well, actually, I would program them literally on long spools of paper tape with 8 holes in it for an ASCII character. And
so you could do graphics?
No, there was no video display terminal.
I thought there might be ASCII graphics, though.
That is what I did. As I would, the teletype games looked a lot like my first Apple games, and it used asterisks for walls, spaces for corridors, $sign for treasure. But every time you made a move, you had to wait about 30 seconds
to redraw the
print
room.
out the new area.
It's like a 1 hertz refresh rate.
Much worse than 1 hertz.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was. So yeah, I go way back. And so I was very, but also it was extremely good time.
And at that time, did you do it for fun or for money or both?
It was originally just for fun. It was actually a big surprise and a shock to me when the first time I converted one of those games onto the Apple II platform, the owner of a local Computerland store where I was working as a summer job said, hey Richard, your game is way better than any of these things, the few games that existed in the day here on the pegboard. Why don't you publish it? So I went out and spent what I thought was a huge amount of money, $200 of my own dollars, to buy Ziploc bags and Xerox cover sheets. One of the first few copies found its way to a distributor in California who asked if they could distribute it nationally. They sent me a contract. I signed it. They sold about 30,000 copies. My royalties were $5 a unit. If you do that math, that's $150,000 for a high school senior for after school time of about 6 weeks.
In what year?
This was 79.
So that was when the dollar still meant something, too.
Yeah.
That was like
in fact,
serious stuff.
It was actually really funny that as a high school senior with 6 weeks worth of time, I doubled or tripled my father's income as an astronaut.
And he was proud.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, but it did. But that was an interesting beginning because that game, which again I had never meant for public consumption, was so successful, it was obvious that I should repeat this and actually create one for public consumption. And so my income level rapidly rose as my grade point average rapidly dove. And so actually in my junior year in college, I began to actually fail my programming classes.
Because you were too busy programming.
Because I was too busy programming,
yes.
And so therefore I made what at the time was a tough decision to drop out of school and play games for a living. Always thinking, my whole family was always of the opinion of, clearly that's the right thing to do today, but eventually when this windfall ends, you'll go back to school and get a real job.
They're still waiting for that. Yeah. So you created the Ultima series of games, is that right?
That's correct, yeah. So,
are there Ultima players here? People that remember Ultima from back in the day? There's one. The numbers are eclipsed by the passion of those who did play it. Highly addictive, immersive World of Warcraft kind of world, right?
It's still the longest running game in history because it goes back to the 1970s and still exists to today. And Ultima Online, the last of the Ultimas, was actually the first of the big, massively multiplayer games, of which World of Warcraft is now what I would describe as a derivative.
Yeah.
And
not in a legal sense, just in the
of course.
imitation, sincerest form
but
of
I feel I got
sense.
to participate not only in the beginnings of the games industry at all, but also the beginnings of now the fastest growing segment, which is the online gaming segment.
Yes. And do you still have a strong hand in that, or you've?
I actually am now, as of fairly recently, out of the games industry to pursue my other new passion, which, as you know, is space.
Space. And the link between software and space, not as attenuated as one might think?
Not really. Well, not for me, and actually not even for other folks in this industry. In our industry, there's a surprising number of people who've made this transition. For me, it actually has a bit of family history. You've already heard my father was a NASA astronaut. And so I actually grew up believing, because of where I lived, with my dad as an astronaut, my neighbors as an astronaut, we're all astronauts. I lived right outside the gates of NASA. I believed everybody was going to go to space because everybody I knew did go to space. And it's true.
You were basically George Jetson, is what you're saying.
Well, and so, I never had one of these things when I grew up, I'm going to be an astronaut just because it was assumed. And
I'm going to design games in my spare time. I'll be an astronaut.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But for me, it was a real shocker in high school when a NASA doctor told me, hey, Richard, I hate to be the one to break it to you, but your bad eyesight means you will never be selected as a NASA astronaut. And that was the first time where I had to actually think about it. And I was, at first I was like horrified that I was being told I'm no longer eligible to be a member of the club that everyone I knew was a member of. Then I reacted a little after kind of getting over that depression. I said, well, look, who are they to tell me whether I'm allowed to go to space or not? If NASA's not going to let me go with NASA, I'll just have to make my own space program.
And you were at what age when you decided this?
About 16, 17 years
16. Talk about fortitude. You clung to that dream.
Yeah, and it's funny, I've made a fortune in the games industry, and I have squandered a fortune in the privatization of space. And as improbable as it sounds,
so some people just spend it at the track.
Yeah.
You spend it at the launch pad.
But it is funny that at first I dove in thinking it would be no problem. I was young enough and ignorant enough not to realize the magnitude of the problem that this would take. After seeing my first attempts fail, when I'm usually investing alongside other astronauts who, by the way, are chosen for their test pilot skills or scientific skills, not because of their entrepreneurial skills. So I learned that lesson early on. Then I realized how hard it was and kind of changed up, learned from that though, and eventually invested with a group of us who did the X Prize, Zero G Corp, and now Space Adventures, which finally cracked the nut, and we are now flying people to space regularly, including myself, as the 6th private citizen to go to space.
And I guess one of the other historical connections between the world of software and the world of space was the notion from way back in the day of the Whole Earth catalog and the Whole Earth movement. In fact, I guess there's the Whole Earth Electronic Network is one of the first BBSs, which was the idea that if we could somehow get people to see the Earth as the sphere, as the planet, as the singularity that it sort of is, that could change consciousness. And are you on that, I don't know if it's fair to call it that more mystical side of things?
Absolutely, and very unexpectedly so, to be honest. In fact, before my flight, I'd always heard other astronauts say how much seeing the Earth from space changes you.
Yes.
And I felt that I was, more worldly or had, for whatever excuse you might wish, to not necessarily think that would happen for me. And as soon as I arrived in orbit, the Earth, of course, was profoundly beautiful, but it isn't, your first view from space is not what's life-changing. It really is, but if you stay in orbit and watch it over a few days, it absolutely is life-changing. And I actually have a few slides to kind of illustrate that. I don't know if you can bring up the slides I had on cue, but what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to take you through just a handful of slides as to why seeing the Earth from space is truly life-changing, and why, at least I now believe, in the importance of, or the value of having a significant percentage of humanity getting this same opportunity, and how much it would change the world if we managed to put together mechanisms by which we can all go to space. And so here is, by the way, it is a mighty good day when you wake up in the morning and put on your own privately made personal spacesuit, and while everybody else is getting as far away as possible, you climb into a fully fueled rocket and light it. That's a good day. And
by privately made, you had a tailor?
Tailor-made.
So talk about bespoke tailoring.
Oh, no, absolutely. Exactly right. So I still have my spacesuit sitting in my house back in Texas.
And is this a guy or gal who's in the regular business, or this was a first-time request for this?
No. The guy, the tailor, who, so to speak, who made my suit is actually the same individual who made every spacesuit back to Gagarin. And so great bit of history there, just like with their rockets. So 2 days after launch, I docked with the ISS. And this is actually the very first shot I took from space. And one of the interesting things about this first shot is, when you're sitting here on the surface of the Earth, it's hard to get a sense of the scale of the Earth. You're too close to it. But immediately when you see the Earth from space, you can do things like I live in Austin, Texas, so I could see Houston and Dallas and Austin all in one view. And I could see the general shape of Texas and at least one coast and the curvature of the Earth to tell you its total size. And so immediately you get this what I'll call empirical understanding of the true scale of the Earth that before that moment you really never had.
And that a photo or a video just can't capture.
Can't capture it. And you also see the thin veil of the atmosphere. And what I mean by that is that there's a little zoomed in of sunrise or sunset. And with the cloud height there, you can see that about 10 times higher than the clouds, the atmosphere is so thin it no longer refracts light. And the space station, by the way, isn't very much higher above that. It's only 250 miles up.
Technically low Earth orbit.
In fact, one of the things you're really struck by is when you look down out a window of the space station, you see a view which is not that different than looking out the window of an airplane. You see clouds and airplane contrails and all these things that are familiar except somewhat farther away and scrolling past you at 17,000 miles an hour, so you're really booking along. But still,
and do they have a frequent flyer program? Do you earn miles? Because you must be seriously elite qualified at this point.
We actually really did try to call some of the airlines to see if they want to do a promotion and give me frequent flyer miles during my trip.
Oddly, they did not bite.
Strangely, they didn't want me to fly for free forever. So, and I also grew up always hearing things like the only thing you can see from space is the Great Wall of China, which you cannot see from space. But on the other hand, if you look down at familiar places, again, you can see all kinds of familiar things. Like here's a shot I took of San Francisco, and you can see Golden Gate Bridge, the Oakland Gate Bridge, Alcatraz. There's a little ship driving into the bay there, where you can see the wake out behind it. I was really just stunned at how intimate and familiar the views looking down were. But as you go around the world, orbit after orbit, the first thing you begin to get a feel for is the large-scale systems of the Earth. And first thing that happens is you get this great understanding, even if you're not a meteorologist, you can just see how weather works, how it forms, how it interacts with the land masses. There's a hurricane I had the good opportunity to catch. The first land you see a lot of tends to be deserts because it's not covered in clouds. So you begin to see how the geomorphology of the world works, and especially how tectonic plate movements has formed all the continents. You can see the results of all the eons of erosion, both by water and by wind. I mean, these are multiple thousands of miles across, these formations called great fans out in the deserts of Africa that I'd never even heard of prior to my flight. These really beautiful but impressive in the sense of the process that made them. That's my house in Austin, Texas. But one of the things that won't hit you until you get a chance to go around quite a few orbits is that every fertile part of the Earth that you can see from space is filled with people. There is no part of the world I ever went past that the footprint of humanity was not extremely clear. The only places you don't see either houses or farms were places like high Arctic tundra, which still has, if you look into all the valleys down there, there's still roads and some habitation between that. And also vast desert areas. But even those vast deserts, which are pretty hard to build in, we're terraforming in ways that, I didn't have this on my list. I just have to look out the window, see the palm lines, click a picture. Wow. So we are literally now moving not only into the deserts in this way, but out in these vast areas of deserts, we're pumping groundwater up to grow these big industrial farms to feed people that aren't within thousands of miles. There was no population center anywhere near this. And going back to what Prince Charles was just saying about the Amazon, the first I heard about all the clear cutting of the Amazon was about the time of my father's flight on Skylab, where this has been, for 35 years this has been an issue. And I'm telling you, every time I went across South America, it was brown, orange smoke covering the whole continent because of all those fires. And the same thing was true in huge regions of Africa. And I was frankly stunned that these stories that I had heard about, but I thought they were actually more commonly talked about, a couple decades ago than I hear about them now, about all this burning. And that made me come back after my flight and want to do research about finding out if the subjective data I saw is reinforced by the analysis that can be done better by people on the ground and or satellites. And the answer, unfortunately, is yes.
Wow. Yeah. So it was your aim to see that you could become an astronaut and get to space. Now that you're pursuing the privatization of it, is it like Christina's goal of wanting to get this functionality available to everybody? Do you want to see it a chance for everyone in this room and beyond to actually get to space?
Absolutely, and I think that is coming much more quickly than I had thought, even as recently as just at the time of my flight. Since my flight, which was just 6 or 8 months ago, I've dove in to help both measure and see how I can assist pick up the pace of this privatization of space, and especially decrease the price of access to space. And I'm sure people are familiar with some suborbital plans. In fact, I think Richard Branson will be here to talk a little bit about that a little later today. And suborbital space is going to be available in a few years at something like $200,000 a flight, but that'll get down, in my mind, to $10 to $40,000. But even orbit, which is the price we're paying with the Russians, is $35–45 million to go to orbit, which is pretty high for most people. But that price ultimately, I think, will get down into the single-digit millions. And once it's down to the single-digit millions, there's work that any of us can do in space that will pay us single-digit millions. I mean, I did, just with a little bit of money, the little bit of time I spent looking for work to do, I offset my ticket cost by millions just by volunteering to do some work. And so that'll open up space for
kind of
lots
like
of us.
cultivating plants? What sort of work are you talking about?
No, it's actually
somebody wanted you to tweet from space.
No, it's medical, scientific, and particularly medical research. There's a lot of very interesting properties of microgravity that are of great benefit.
So for your carriage, you're allowed a certain number of carry-on bags or something, and if you want to put some mice in there or something else, you just unbundle it and people nod knowingly.
And so that's why I think that there's. The thing I'm so excited about, though, all these private individuals, and a lot of us in the high-tech industry, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, John Carmack, and others, who are now going from games and software into rockets for some reason. All of us, I think, are believers now that there's going to be this point of meeting where the price will come down low enough, and the work we can do in space, the value we can generate in space, will be great enough to where those will intersect. Yeah. And that's going to happen probably no sooner than 5 years, clearly no longer than 20, I'd guess 10. Yeah. And when that does, I think we're going to see just a dramatic increase in the access to space.
And we talked with Christina, Christian, and Daniel a little bit about infrastructure and what they needed to get their companies going. What's the infrastructure situation for your venture right now? Is it, and you have engineers, are you doing R&D, or is it more integrating different pieces of a puzzle to create a single package that could then get people into space?
Well, it's interesting. So for my software businesses that I started, 20 and 30 years ago, we did it on nothing but personal assets. I mean, there was really no outside investment in either of my two software companies. However, that's not the same. The same is not true for space. Space is definitely a multi-million-dollar endeavor. But what's funny is when we talk about, I think you're doing a great job if you can get things done for $500,000 to $1 million in the social networks. I think that's actually a brilliant strategy and one of the reasons why you can cycle quickly and really do a great job for customers. But in the packaged goods business that I was most recently in, that number is 10 million on the cheap side and up to pushing 100 million these days. But for that same amount of 10 to 100 million, you can build some pretty darn good rockets. So those of us who are used to already investing tens to hundreds of millions of dollars over 2 to 5 years, the rocket business actually isn't so bad. So that, in fact, there's a lot less competition, we've noted. And so we think we'll be able to do a pretty good job.
Yeah. Well, that leads to a question that's maybe even common among you. When you pick your domain, is it one where you want to go almost metaphorically, like not a lot of human habitation around it, but close enough that success can be measured by having people not too long after you get started realize the value of what you're doing? Or is it okay to get into sort of a saturated zone of sorts? I don't know, Daniel, how much when you got into this you felt you were entering terra incognita or very well-traveled territory?
I think it's definitely well-traveled territory, but for me it's really about tackling a big enough problem to make it interesting enough, and I think that's something that we're all doing here in different sorts. My industry is a $20 billion industry, it's a $50 billion industry. The space, who knows, it's probably endless of hundreds of billions that have been spent already in space. So it's all, and on the carrier side, it's massive industries. So I think, at least for me, it's about the challenge is we know what people are doing right now. They are consuming content in all these different kind of ways, and we just want to facilitate it. And at the same time, I felt attracted to the size of the project and the fact that there's been people for 15 years trying to do it, but failed.
Which is a sure sign that you should get into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Got it. Christina, similar experience?
Yeah, I think very much so. I think it's really about tackling a mass market issue. And for Spinvox, it was very focused on changing the way we communicate. And subsequently, it's become about speech technology, interestingly, and changing the speech industry and ultimately owning the speech industry. And that trajectory that we're on right now began with a simple human frustration that I don't want to listen to voicemail. And I think most great businesses and most simple businesses begin with a simple idea.
And to recruit people to join you in the venture,
Yeah.
is the first question in an interview, how do you feel about voicemail? Do you hate it as much as I do? Or is it a package of benefits that you can offer? I mean, how much do you need a certain type of personality to join what I guess is inherently a more risky play than, you know, you're the pebble joining one of the big stones?
Well, we always have everyone use the product, and then they typically foster an anger toward voicemail. Most of us don't know we hate voicemail until we have Spinbox, and then we recognize how much time we wasted. But more importantly, I think any entrepreneurial venture, again, looks for someone who is naturally a risk taker. And in this economic climate, more than ever, people are flocking to entrepreneurial ventures
They're flocking to entrepreneurial ventures. They're not seeking safety in
No, because
the tried
the
and true.
tradition doesn't seem so safe anymore.
Huh.
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think especially early on when you look for sort of the core team for your venture, you've got to find the people with the passion, the fire in their hearts, the guys who want to go out and change the world. I mean, there's a time when you grow big enough that there is room for people who are, who look for that safety and look for just applying
It's about
their
the time
skills,
that your initial round of employees is getting taken away by other startups, right?
No. If you create a great enough culture where and you create really not just a great product but a great company where people genuinely feel like their contributions are recognized and they feel like they ultimately are recognized for what they do, then they hopefully stay over time.
And is the culture of entrepreneurship, is it still noticeably different from one region to the next, from one place to the next?
So I think at least London, I think, is getting better, but still comparing London to somewhere like the Silicon Valley where everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. Here, when you say you're an entrepreneur, people are sort of starting to get it slowly but surely that, hey,
they ask you what didn't work out at your last job.
Yeah, kind of. They say, politely, but, that's what tends to happen. I think, once you do it long enough, like this is my second venture, you kind of, you sort of get used to it. But I do think that there's an enormous opportunity in the current economic climate where perhaps, at the moment, I did my undergrad here at Cambridge, and literally every one of my classmates, I did economics for my sins. I, obviously moved away from there, but nearly all of my classmates either went into banking or consultancies, and those were the aggressive recruiters. Those were the careers that you were meant to go for, if you like, as a bright graduate. And I think now actually graduates are rethinking this, and I think there's a lot more, if you like, actually being involved in making real things or changing the world in one way or another is actually beginning to get a lot more interest, I think.
Got it. How important is Silicon Valley specifically to what you're trying to do?
So for us, it's crucial. I mean, Facebook is based there, and a lot of the social networking thinking originates from over there. We set up an office in San Francisco very quickly, and mainly because to be close to companies like Google and Facebook and MySpace and others. So.
And in your experience, are those who might invest money or do deals, are they indifferent to the international dimension, or is it almost seem like a strike against you not being American? Is there any cultural divide there?
I think so. So to the credit of Silicon Valley, it's an incredibly meritocratic place in every sense of the word. If if you know what you're doing, if you have a great product or a great solution, I think you'll do well. I think the challenge is that you've got to be local in order to sell to any local market or in order to be an effective partner anywhere locally. And I think, especially as a UK-based firm, and in my previous company, which it took us 6 years to build, and we eventually listed on the Nasdaq in the US, it's sort of very early on we were completely arrogant about hey, we don't really need an office in the US because hey, we speak English, or we can figure this out. As it turns out, this time around we set up over there very early on because it is very hard to sell, especially to bigger US companies. And if you overlook that, then you will get gobbled up by local competition.
Yeah.
So.
Christina, where would you prefer to get started, the US or China as your next branch?
China would be easier.
Wow.
I've definitely found the US as a privately owned, even as a heavily funded privately owned business in the UK, it is very difficult to penetrate the United States, even with an American accent. It is a very big challenge. And,
it's actually one of the reasons why we got ourselves a US-based investor very early on, in order to have that sort of, at least a stamp,
The investor says, what else do you need from me? You're like, just stand there.
Yeah, exactly.
Stand there and be American.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, I can do that.
I can.
Yeah. Richard, were you wanting to get in? Were you going to say something about this dimension, the cultural?
Yeah, no, it is interesting that, having, I of course grew up in Houston, where the whole neighborhood was we can all go to the space and the moon and everything, so it all seemed completely natural to fall into an entrepreneurial, lifestyle. But I too have found it interesting that as you travel around globally, even some of the major markets, whether it's Europe or Asia, that entrepreneurial instinct is not nearly as well fostered. But I think that's changing over time. So time will be the great equalizer on that.
And now I have to ask, just wearing for a moment a law professor's hat, patents, IP, all the stuff that you got to call in the lawyers for, how much does that matter to what you're trying to do, either prospectively, offensively, that it builds value for your business, that you've got some portfolio of stuff you can say is patented, or defensively, that you might make a move in online gaming or in voice translation, and there's, 1,000 incomprehensible patents, any one of which could be that mine that you step on that somebody serves you with something. Is that an issue, or you just sort of build it and hope for the best?
No, it definitely is an issue. So for me, it was an issue from day one. We filed very early on and have over 60 patents now granted worldwide. But it's definitely not a business practice. So I'm not a big firm believer in suing people. I think from my perspective, it's a defensive position.
So if somebody comes after you with a patent, you can say, well, I've got 60 where that came from. Why don't we just agree to disagree and go away?
That is one approach. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I would actually say too, it is fundamentally it's gotten much worse over time. It started as just the difficulties of even things like copyright protection, but in order to try to protect your intellectual property, people have gotten so patent happy, at least in the online gaming space, that I think there have been grants of extremely loosely written patents, which people are now suing each other over, which I think are, it's a non-solvable issue. So it's really going to be a mess for some years before that all gets sorted out.
Yeah. Any other worries about that? Or?
Well, my business revolves around IP, at least licensing it from content owners. So, but we're not firm believers of patents of such. And again, it's more about execution. And frankly, I'd rather have people try to copy me, and we'll try and stay ahead and be even better.
Got it. So, questions, thoughts, reactions. I've got a mic, and I think there are others as well. Are you just adjusting? Oh, here, sir, tell us who you are.
Andrew Walmsley from iLevel. I have a question for Richard. It was disappointing, obviously, when you booked that flight that you couldn't get the mileage. I wondered if you'd considered checking the box to offset your carbon emissions.
I did check the box to offset my carbon emissions. That was one of the first things I did. And what's interesting is, my father, being a scientist astronaut, it actually brought up an interesting scientific debate within the family. My whole family would describe themselves as environmentalists, but we still have healthy arguments as to the right way to support that environmental cause. But I absolutely did buy carbon offsets for my flight.
And just out of curiosity, roughly how much does a carbon offset for
so
for those of us considering travel in the near future?
It's actually far, far less than the ticket to fly to space. It was actually truly only a few $1,000s. Because the amount of carbon that a Soyuz puts up, a Soyuz rocket puts out considerably less carbon than one jumbo jet flying across the Atlantic. So it's really, the impact is not nearly what you might speculate on for a Russian vehicle.
In fact,
now,
if you
the space shuttle, by the way, is a whole other question. That actually puts out all kinds of.
I was going to say, if you land at a different
emissions.
place and saved the flight you would have otherwise taken, you might be due a carbon bonus.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
So
Yeah.
let's talk. Other questions? Over here. Yes. Tell us who you are.
This one's for Danielle. Very interestingly, I was first shown a private beta version of Spotify by the founders of Kazaa. And so compliments to the UI. It is fantastic. The question is, we talked about the crowded landscape you're obviously operating in. What's going to be the key differentiating factor for consumers to choose Spotify over the various other alternatives? I kind of heard you mention DRM and a looser version of DRM, and therefore portability over time. And if that is indeed one of the cornerstones, how do you balance that against sort of big music content providers' desire to maximize revenue?
So firstly, I mean, again, I think the biggest differentiator between Spotify and something else is, first and foremost, we're a platform play, which means that we actually hope that other people will build interesting stuff on top of Spotify, which could potentially be music recommendations, radio stations, et cetera, while we figure out the licensing and monetization of the content. And secondarily, when it comes to DRM or no DRM, I think it's how the DRM is being implemented that is the key. I mean, DRM is a very negative word on its own, but really, it's digital rights management. So, whether or not you can play a track in a certain territory, whether or not it's tied to this device, I think, it's all about how you implement the functionality in the end. So the way I kind of look at this is that this is a play where the simplest problem hasn't been solved. It's, how can I play whatever music I want, whenever I want it, wherever I am, on whatever device I want. This is so hard today. I try to actually transfer 8 tracks to my Nokia N95 because my other phone stopped working. It took me about 45 minutes, and I'm a Mac user, and I had to switch to a PC, then install 2 gigs of software from Nokia Synchronization Suite, or whatever it was called. And it took about 40 minutes to actually get 8 tracks to that device, which is really, shows that the simplest problem isn't solved. And that's kind of what we're trying to do.
And that's what you, I guess, would have to do in consultation with a number of the license holders back and forth. And are they tend to be monolithic, or might you find different people within the same firm differing with each other?
Again, they have strategies, but of course it differs from who you speak to. So for instance, North America might have one view, and the UK might have another view, or the mobile guy might have one view, and the physical sales guy might have another view. But again, it's really talking to them, making them understand that we're trying to do what's good for the industry, and they know that today.
And for those wondering, is North America coming soon for Spotify?
Yeah, we definitely hope so. I mean, again, we're a small startup. We're about 80 people. We do want to roll it out, and we hope to be in North America, hopefully, somewhere at the end of the year, maybe early next year.
Yes. Well, this has been an incredible tour of such a variety of new frontiers, and at least 4 different instrumentalities that I think all of us, if we haven't tried yet, are all now going to run out and try. And am I right in thinking that there are demos of at least Spotify running outside?
Yes.
Is that
so
right?
It's supposed to be installed on the computers outside, so try it if you can.
And ditto for the others. They ought to be pretty easy to get to on the net-connected machines. And you'll offer personalized tours coming up?
I want to demo the space rocket,
And it's, that's right. We want a tour of something.
Give me a call.
Wonderful. Well, please join me in thanking our panel so much for this thing. Thank you. That was terrific. Thank you.